Welcome to the Comedy Reset Spotlight. This is the place to be if you want to hear from some of the most innovative and exciting comedy creators from around the globe. On this podcast, you'll hear from a variety of guests who are pushing the boundaries of what comedy can be. If you're looking for fresh perspectives and new ideas, this is the podcast for you.
Episode 28. San Francisco comedian Jade Wong.
When did you first start doing stand-up comedy?
I retired early in the pandemic and had a lot of free time on my hands. I had avoided public speaking for most of my life, so I signed up for Toastmasters. I wrote my introductory icebreaker speech, and the first draft put me to sleep. So I rewrote it with some jokes and had more fun giving that speech than any other talk I'd given in my life. After that, I signed up for a comedy class and fell in love with stand-up comedy.
What made you want to become a stand-up comedian?
Our son was visiting during the pandemic. He was watching the Dave Chappelle 2019 Netflix special. I really wasn't used to watching stand-up comedy. I was washing dishes, and I started to listen to what Chappelle was saying and stopped doing dishes, sat down on the sofa next to our son, and watched the rest of his show mesmerized. I mean, Chappelle had this amazing connection with his audience. He was so creative and skilled, and he gets to vape on stage. You know, I worked as an eye doctor, and I couldn't even chew gum.
Who were some of your influences?
My parents immigrated from Hong Kong and China to Wisconsin, where they ran a restaurant that was open 365 days a year. The restaurant was a handful. My dad had a lot on his mind, and he was pretty no nonsense. He would watch Johnny Carson and Jack Benny, and I remember him letting out these huge belly laughs. I don't ever remember him telling a joke himself, but I think he would have liked to. My mom was a different cup of tea, which is, I hope is not a racist comment, but she was more lighthearted, full of joy. I'll never forget when our son was a toddler, she would make him laugh by doing these silly dances, songs she made up, and very funny faces. I wish she was around now because I would nab her for one of my TikTok videos.
What was your first time on stage like?
I started doing stand-up comedy during the pandemic, so I had a few Zoom open mic shows under my belt, but I was really eager to do my set in front of a live audience. I happened to be shopping at a wool shop and struck up a conversation with the owner of the shop. When she found out I did stand-up comedy, she asked if she could see some of my sets online. When I told her no, she was disappointed, so I offered to do my set right then and there. I told her that she shouldn't feel compelled to laugh because I'm happy if I get even one laugh. And she laughed at that. And I started my set. I was surrounded by all this wool, so I felt like there were the spirits of many sheep in as an audience. It was really fun. I liked communicating just with the one owner. She was delightful. When I finished my set, she said, "Wait a minute." She went back into the storeroom, and came back with something for me. It was a personal sized plastic bottle of champagne. So I was paid for my first stand up gig with alcohol.
What's your favorite joke?
I really love the single panel cartoons in the New Yorker. It's wonderful when a very funny image is perfectly matched with one or two lines of very funny writing. A couple of years ago, when we were dealing with an illness in the family for about a 6-month period, I made a single panel cartoon every week. It was really helpful in getting through that challenging period of time. And when I write jokes now, I really feel good if I can clearly imagine a humorous image, which I hope the audience can imagine as well. Bob Mankoff was the editor for the New Yorker comics for quite a while. And I like one of his cartoons that shows a businessman looking at his appointment book while speaking on the phone. The caption says, "No Thursdays out. How about never? Is never good for you?"
What's the worst heckler experience you've ever had?
I did a Zoom mic, and to be fair, I did sing a few lines of a song I had written, and I'm not a singer. The comedian who came up after me, a young man, looked at me during his set and said, "So, Jade, how old are you? You remind me of my grandmother." I was so new to stand up, I was flummoxed and I don't think I said anything. But amazingly, no less than 3 comedians who came up after the young man called him out for heckling and reprimanded him. So, bravo to my fellow comedians for being so supportive. And I did write a set about it, so it was not a total loss.
What's the best gig you've ever had?
A couple of months ago, our son got to see me do one of my sets live at an open mic for the first time. Before that, I had told him an occasional isolated joke when I was going through a low point in my comedy career. He gave me a nice pep talk, something like, "Oh, come on, Mom, don't get down on yourself. Um, just keep going." So on this particular evening, we piled in the car. My husband was driving, son was in the back seat. I had convinced myself that I was relaxed about our son seeing me do comedy, but maybe not so relaxed because even though I was feeling fine, I said, "Oh, I have a headache." My husband looked at me and said, "Should we turn around?" And I said, "No, no, I think I'm okay." It was my way of setting the bar low. So I did my set, and it was a longer set than usual. The first 6 minutes I thought went well. The next 6 minutes I should have shaved to 3 minutes, but it was a lovely crowd, and they were very generous. Um, and I felt good about the whole thing. I remember walking back, and people were clapping, and I saw this smile on my son's face, which I translated as "You done good, Mom." So that's been my best gig so far.
What's the worst gig you've ever had?
I can't remember doing a set and feeling like I wish I hadn't ever done it at all. Even even when a set goes south, usually there's something in the experience that helps me to do the next set just a little bit better. And call me a glutton for punishment, but I actually appreciate the lesson in humility. I try to remember that my ego has been bruised before, and it does a decent job at recovering.
How do you deal with stage fright?
At some point, while I'm waiting to go up to do my set, a voice inside my head will say, "Well, you really probably could escape and you wouldn't get into too much trouble." And usually another voice will say, "Yeah, I mean, you could do that if that's what you really want." When I'm just about to get to the microphone, I try to remember to take a couple deep breaths. And at the end of the exhale, I whisper, "Boo Boo Bear." That is an attempt to try to keep my voice a bit lower while I'm on stage. I also try to imagine someone in the audience who's had a hard day, and I think about how sweet it would be if I could get them to laugh.
What was the most unexpected response you've ever gotten to one of your jokes?
Years ago, I went to a women's retreat at our synagogue. They had a stand up comedy night where you could go on stage and tell a joke or two. So I gathered up my courage and got on stage. It was a theater in the round, and I said, I'm sure you're all wondering why a Chinese woman is up here trying to tell you all jokes." That actually got a big laugh. Then I launched into the joke that I had rehearsed many times with my husband: crickets.
How do you prepare for a show?
I try to get a good night's sleep the night before, but that doesn't always work. I listen to a recording of the set, and then I try to either walk or bike around our nearby lake while I'm doing the set 2 or 3 times. I try to pay attention to where I'm going so I don't cause any collisions, but I find it helpful to practice the set when there's stimuli, visual and auditory stimuli to distract me, but I can still keep focused on the delivery. I try not to drink water for the 2 hours beforehand for obvious reasons, and I also avoid greasy, spicy food.
What's the best advice you've ever been given about stand up comedy?
Write, edit, and perform often. Learn from other comedians and from your audience, and have a ton of fun.
What's the worst advice you've ever been given about stand up comedy?
When I first started doing stand up comedy, there was a terrible uptick in incidents of Asian hate. Another Asian American woman, when she learned I was doing stand up comedy, said to me, "Well, with all of this going on, you're going to stop, right?" I said, Actually, with all of this going on, kind of makes sense for me to keep going, right?"
What would you say is the biggest misconception about stand up comedy?
My bad. I knew so little about stand up comedy. I thought comedians were improvising. Now I know that there's a lot of artistry and hard work and persistence that's involved. I have so much more respect for comedians and their craft.
What do you believe is the key to success in stand up comedy?
I can't speak for other people, but for me, I feel like I'm successful in stand up comedy when I wake up in the morning and I can't wait to start writing jokes and working on my performance. That tells me that I'm enjoying the process and I have this eagerness to get better. It's also important that the audience finds you relatable and that you're listening to the audience because, after all, you're in a conversation.
What do you think is the biggest obstacle that stand up comedians face?
For me, it's a challenge to get enough live stage time. I live in a city that has only one dedicated stand up open mic per month, and I don't like driving at night. So, in that regard, the Zoom online comedy shows were a godsend. I've dragged my feet for over a year with social media, but last week I finally got on Instagram and TikTok. My handle is Jade Wong Comedy. And at this stage, um, it's more fun than getting my teeth cleaned.
What do you think sets stand up comedy apart from other forms of comedy?
Here's my haiku answer. One voice all alone seeks laughter in the forest. Where's the microphone?
What are the benefits of stand up comedy?
There are so many benefits that I'm afraid I would make my answer way too long. So I'm just going to say that the best benefit for me is that I laugh more each day.
What's your process for writing jokes?
An idea for a joke can pop up out of nowhere. I've been known to be in the middle of a bike ride and have to stop the bike and get off, whip out my phone, and write down the joke idea in the notes section. The joke can be based on something that happened decades ago or something that happened minutes ago. Then I hopefully later that day will sit down and try to write the joke, rewrite it, and maybe even record it and see what it sounds like. I'll try to run it by someone. I used to rely on my husband exclusively, but as the number of jokes I write increased, that was wearing a little thin. So now I get on Rob Chioffi's Joke Zoom and run the new joke by other comedians. Uh, just recently, I've been also using Instagram and TikTok to post new jokes and see what kind of reception they get. If a joke involves my husband, I run it by him to make sure that I'm not punching down because that could have severe repercussions.
What's the most important thing for a stand up comedian to remember?
I try to remember to enjoy the whole process, coming up with ideas, writing, performing, and especially sharing the company of amazing fellow comedians.
What do you think are the best techniques for dealing with hecklers?
I'm not sure how best to deal with a heckler, but I do like Tig Notaro's line, I'm not everyone's cup of tea. I mean, why would everyone like oolong?
What do you think are the biggest mistakes that stand up comedians make?
I used to think of stand up comedy as a performance, but now I think about it more as a give and take. Some of my favorite comedians seem like they are talking to you over the kitchen table at night. It's intimate and it seems spontaneous and comfortable. So I would like to be more in the moment with my stand up comedy. And I'd like to listen to the audience so that they can help shape my set.
What is the best way to learn stand up comedy?
I took a few online classes through Flappers Comedy Club in Burbank, California. I also read Judy Carter's wonderful new comedy Bible. And I watched a heck of a lot of stand-up comedy that helped me to identify different writing and performing styles so that I could choose my own.
What do you think is the best way to improve as a stand-up comedian?
If you wake up in the morning and just can't wait to start doing stand-up comedy, you're going to get better.
What has stand-up comedy taught you about yourself?
For most of my life, I avoided public speaking. It made me uncomfortable, and I thought I was bad at it. Now I do stand-up comedy. Something I thought I hated, I actually now love.
What motivates you to keep performing stand-up comedy?
I enjoy the creative process, expressing my voice, sharing my story. It is all worth it if someone in the audience thinks, well, if she can go up there and do that, so can I. I also like hanging around other comedians. They're supportive, insightful, and delightfully quirky.
What advice would you give to someone who's thinking about doing stand-up comedy?
I would tell someone thinking of doing stand-up comedy to try it because you might really like it. It may change your life. And if you don't like it, one less item on your bucket list.
Is there anything you'd like to add that we did not cover?
Don't let your age, whether you're younger or older, get in the way of doing stand-up comedy. It doesn't matter if you weren't the class clown. You can nurture the voice inside of you that says, you are a comedian. Rob Cioffi is an amazing human being. Check out his joke Zoom. It rocks.
I've been your host, Rob Cioffi. Don't forget to laugh today. It's good for you. Comedy Reset Spotlight is a podcast that brings you today's freshest and funniest comedy creators. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to hear more.